Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Ballava Girivaradhari. Gopijana Ballava Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Ballava Girivaradhari. Gopijana Ballava Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Tadastamad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki. Shishinatai Gora Hari Ki. Sankirtan Yagya Ki. Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vibhu Chaitanya Prabhu Ki Jai. Haribol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7. Further Inquiries by Vidura. Text 42, which we don't have written up. Who wrote up the verse yesterday? Oh, Gita Mala. Oh, I see, yesterday. Okay. I see. Okay. So I'll just, I guess, well, those who've got, we can do it responsively then. Shri Shukravacha Sa Itam Aprishta Purana Kalpa Kuro Pradhanena Muni Pradhana Pravrida Harsho Bhagavat Katayam Sanchoditas Tam Prahasan Ivaha Shri Shukravacha Saitama Prishna Purana Kalpa Kuru Pradhanena Muni Pradhana Pravridda Harsho Bhagavat Katayam Sanchodidastam Prahasani Vaha Shri Shukravacha Saitama Prishta Purana Kalpa Kuru Pradhanena Muni Pradhana Pravriddha Harsho Bhagavad-Gitayam Sanchodidastam Prahasanivaha Shri Shukravacha Saitama Prishta Purana Kalpa Kuru Pradhanena Muni Pradhana Pravriddha Harsho Bhagavad-Gitayam Sanchoditastan Tam Prahasanivaha Mataji's. Shri Shukravacha. Shri Shukadev Goswami said, Sa hi itam, thus aprishta, being questioned, Purana Kalpa, one who knows how to explain the supplements of the Vedas, the Puranas, Kuru Pradhanena, by the chief of the Kurus, Muni Pradhana, the chief amongst the sages, Pravriddha, sufficiently enriched, Harsha, satisfaction, Bhagavat, the personality of Godhead, Katayam, in the topics of Sanchodita, being so infused, tam, unto Vidura, prahasan, with smiles, eva, like that, aha, replied. Translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, thus the chief of the sages, who was always enthusiastic about describing topics regarding the personality of Godhead, began to narrate the descriptive explanation of the Puranas, being so infused by Vidura. He was very much enlivened by speaking on the transcendental activities of the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Great learned sages like Maitreya Muni are always very enthusiastic about describing the transcendental activities of the Lord. Maitreya Muni, being thus invited by Vidura to speak, appeared to be smiling because he actually felt transcendental bliss. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Further Inquiries by Vidura. And let me read the verse again. Shishukurivacha Saitam aprishta purana kalpa kuru pradhanena muni pradhana pravriddha harsho bhagavat-katayam sanchodidastam prahasan ivaha. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, thus the chief of the sages, who was always enthusiastic about describing topics regarding the personality of Godhead, began to narrate the descriptive explanation of the Puranas, being so infused by Vidura. He was very much enlivened by speaking on the transcendental activities of the Lord. Nama Om Vishnupada Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastityade Jatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes, so this is the end of the 7th chapter of 3rd canto Srimad Bhagavatam. And, well, it's a very important part of the Bhagavatam. Maitreya speaks the whole 4th canto and into the 5th canto, as I recall. He's a prominent speaker in Srimad Bhagavatam. And here, the particular point, which is really very interesting, is that Vidura, he's the one who asked the questions to stimulate, or he wanted answers from Maitreya. So he was interested, Vidura was interested, he wanted to know, to understand more deeply, like this. And Maitreya was the one who knew. Actually, they both knew really, but in a sort of, in terms of the exchange, the relationship, it's like that. Vidura's the one who doesn't know. Therefore he's asking the questions. Maitreya is the one who does know, and he's giving the answers. And normally, at least generally speaking, at least in many cases, on the material level, when someone knows a lot about some particular subject, then, well, they know it. And it's not so exciting. It's something they know, something they've known for some time. So on the material level, it tends to be like that the one who knows, who answers the questions, it's not as exciting or as inspiring as it is for the one who has asked the questions and is looking for the answers. Because generally speaking, if someone is interested in a subject, they want to understand something, and it's important to them to understand, then when they get the answers, oh, that's very good. That's very nice. Whereas for the one who knows, and, like at school, at university, these types of educational places, then the lecturers, the teachers, generally, they've given the same lecture how many times? For years. Some of these senior lecturers, they've been lecturing for 30 years or more, and it's just the same lecture. And they just know it in and out, and it's like, yeah, sure. That sort of thing. But the students, at least if they're interested students and not sort of lackadaisical students, the students, if they're interested in the subject and they want to understand, and it means something to them, and they feel like we are going to use this knowledge, we need this knowledge, then it's more interesting. It's more interesting than it is for the one who's sort of, in many cases, kind of parroting things off for about the 50th time or more. So, but here, it's interesting that Maitreya was very much enlivened. Maitreya, who was always enthusiastic about describing topics regarding the personality of Godhead. He was always enthusiastic, even though in many cases, in many senses, he's sort of repeating. He's repeating the same thing that he's already said before, because he's a prominent person amongst the sages, and people would approach him and he'd be asked to speak when there are different occasions, events. People would turn to him. So it's interesting that the subject matter, all these subject matters, because Vidura's asked all sorts of questions from different angles of vision, different perspectives. I mean, he's so deeply interested that he's really coming at it from the top and the bottom and the sides, and really, it's for him it's a very deep experience. But it's also a deep experience for Maitreya. Even though he's said the same things in one form or another, basically, many times. And it's like that, actually. Just from my own small experience in giving seminars, the first time, at least in my experience, first time you give a seminar, it's not so, it's more difficult because you're trying to get it together, but after a while it becomes easier, but it becomes better. And you tell the same story. I don't know what's the story I've taught the most, told the most. Yes. How many times, anyway? What to do? It's a pastime, the door pastime. Hare Krishna! Wow! Ram Govinda Maharaj! Hare Krishna, Suswagatam! Nice to see you. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, welcome. आपकी तबीयत कैसी है? Oh, Krishna ka Ashirvad. Hare Krishna. Betiye aap. There's a chair coming. Look at that, here it comes. Well, how nice to get the association of a saintly person. Please have a seat, Maharaj. Relax. So, well, yes, right. Oh yeah, me and my seminars. And my experience, I don't know what's the story I've told the most, because, I get into telling stories quite often. But there's one story which is very meaningful. One that just comes to mind, shall we say, which is very meaningful, and I've told it so many times. That's the story of Madhavendra Puri, Ishvara Puri, and Ramachandra Puri from the Anchalila of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And there's a lot to learn from that story, and I've told it. Gee whiz, I haven't kept count. Just like when I was in London in the 70s, I didn't keep count of how many times I got arrested by the police for book distribution and Harinam. But it was probably at least 50 times or more. So I haven't kept count of how many times I've told that story. But I can report to you all that I love telling that story. Well, it's a better color, but it's not as... Okay, anyway, whatever. Right, yeah, so this is the thing. Krishna conscious subject matters are like that. That the more you tell them or hear them, and the more you think about them and consider them, the more interesting they become. And it's not just like, oh, it's the same old thing for the 50th or 100th time. But it's always nice. It's always nice. And not only is it always nice, but it is increasingly nice to hear and or speak different topics regarding, specific topics regarding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even you're not this body, is very exciting and interesting. It really is. And, the way it's been, there are different ways we can appreciate the point. But one is, it's kind of interesting. Those of you who are here, you wouldn't have had the experience. But I have had a lot of experience with a particular type of Russian. I know Russia is very sort of, controversial or whatever these days, but a particular type of Russian cake. They're not so controversial. But Russian cakes, a Russian cake is called a tort, T-O-R-T. And the classic, the real sort of, super duper Russian cake has multiple thin layers, many, and each layer's like, I don't know, a couple of millimeters. And as you bite into it, and you sort of go layer to layer to layer to layer, the different tastes come, you see. And it really is quite an experience. So, in a certain sense, it's not a bad example. It's not a perfect example, but it's not a bad example in regards to Krishna Katha. Krishna Katha, Ram Katha, Chaitanya Katha, Nityananda Katha, Radha Katha, Prabhupada Katha. Wow, Prabhupada Katha is amazing. It's just amazing. There's so many different levels of appreciation, realization, understanding that comes, if one tries to hear nicely. And therefore it's a whole different experience from material education, either for the educator or the educated, either for the teachers or the students. But at least we can understand, and probably we've had experience, that for students, if they have an interest in the subject matter, and they actually want to learn it and get into it, then it's more interesting for them to hear the presentation by the teacher generally than it is for the teacher who's just repeating the same thing he's repeated so many times. So therefore, in the previous verse, it was Vidura was speaking, right? Yes, Vidura's speaking that your answers to all these questions, many questions he's placed, will grant immunity from all material miseries. Such charity is greater than all Vedic charities, sacrifices, penances, etc. In other words, Vidura, he's very expectant and optimistic or something like that. We're going to get the nectar now. And it's nectar, but it's not just nectar like we will enjoy, although we will enjoy, but it's nectar in the sense that the result, the effect of it, is so powerful, so transformative, so beneficially transformative to the audience that, as the previous verse, as Vidura said, it will grant immunity from all material miseries to the audience. And that, once you've had enough experience with the miseries of material life, and if you have the clarity of mind to understand that, not just that it's miserable, but that we should not have to go through this. There has to be something better than just suffering the different material miseries and just learning tolerance like that. So for the devotee who hears, it's nectar, it's enjoyable. It's just really tasty in so many ways. And it is so extremely beneficial that, of course, one has to be somewhat tuned in. One has to be somewhat tuned in order to get it clearly enough. There are different degrees of understanding, but when someone starts coming to the level of understanding that I have to apply this, I have to change my life in terms of this knowledge and really do something much better with my life, then wow, it's liberating. It's liberating. Of course, the devotees are not really so concerned about liberation, but still it's liberating from the problems of material life and just from material life with everything that comes with it. So that's for the audience, but it has a similar type of effect on the speaker. And therefore a nice speaker who appreciates the subject matter and really has an interest in the subject matter, it just becomes nicer and nicer to speak. It becomes nicer and nicer for the devotee to speak. And therefore, in this exchange here, they're both going to be tremendously benefited. It'll be just a wonderful experience for both of them. There's a nice little passage from Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan after he's finished his Bhagavad-Gita commentary. Baladev Vijayabhushan, his Bhagavad-Gita commentary is very important, and Srila Prabhupada, you probably noticed, dedicates his Bhagavad-Gita to Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan. So Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan says that I was living at Radha Kund, and of course it's the topmost spiritual place. So I was living at Radha Kund and relishing Radha Krishna Leela and just relishing the transcendental atmosphere in that most sacred place. But then the devotees approached me and said, could you please do a commentary on Bhagavad-Gita for us? And Baladev Vijayabhushan says, initially I thought that, listen, I'm here in Radha Kund. I'm just immersed in Radha Krishna Leela and in so many different ways. And Bhagavad-Gita, of course, it's Bhagavad-Gita. It's very nice and very important. But it's all philosophy and it's for beginners. It's for bringing people to the point that, okay, I'll become Krishna conscious then. From the point of, we don't really know if we want to become Krishna conscious or not. But bringing people to the point, yes, I will surrender to Krishna. I'll become a devotee. So Baladev Vijayabhushan says that he was thinking something like that. Why should I do this? It's good, of course it's good for a particular class of person or particular level of person, and I don't really need it so much. But then he says that, however, the devotees were asking me, a number of devotees, and he says that I felt that I cannot refuse so many devotees. So he says, I agreed to do it as a service. But then I started translating and commenting on Bhagavad-Gita. And he says that then it seemed, the experience was such, it was like Krishna put me on a boat and pushed me out into the ocean of Bhagavad-Gita. So there I was, floating in the ocean of Bhagavad-Gita. Suddenly, the boat sank, and it became like a submarine. And I started diving down deeper and deeper into the ocean of Bhagavad-Gita. And as I was diving deeper into that ocean, I was discovering more and more jewels in the understandings, because in a lot of cases, jewels come from the ocean. Yeah, jewels come from the ocean. So as I was diving deeper and deeper into this ocean of Bhagavad-Gita and discovering more and more jewels in the meanings, then finally I reached the point where I thought, I don't want to come out. I'm just going to stay in this ocean of Bhagavad-Gita. And that's interesting in many ways, but particularly he was a real, there's this term, rasika devotee. Yes, and really, just immersed and just drowning in Krishna Katha, Radha Katha, and all these things. But then this was his experience with Bhagavad Gita. When Srila Bhaktisiddhanta went to Radha Kund, and he decided to do a series of classes, like a little lecture series during Kartik. Then the Babajis, they thought it was going to be all, pastimes and all this, what they normally do. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta did a seminar on the Upanishads. It means really philosophical, really philosophical. Because he felt Radhakund is a great place for the Upanishads, for philosophy. So it's like that, and Srila Prabhupada makes that point also, that in regards to his, there's a conversation of Srila Prabhupada with one scholar, like an Indologist scholar, and there's the subject of more elevated Krishna Katha sort of thing, the pastimes and all that, as opposed to in the Krishna book, in the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, Krishna killing the demons. And Srila Prabhupada, so this person's saying that, we should focus on the more elevated pastimes, elevated. And Prabhupada makes the point that we should not see a difference between Krishna killing the demons, Krishna dancing with the gopis, the Purusha avatars, Mahavishnu, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, Shiradakshay Vishnu, creating the universe. All these things, we shouldn't really distinguish between them, the descriptions. But we should be eager to really immerse ourselves in all of them. Yes, so, Srila Prabhupada, of course, he was the expert on Krishna consciousness in, regardless of what circle of devotees might be involved, be they Babajis or Sri Vaishnavas or Nimbaka Acharya followers. Prabhupada was just in a class completely of his own. And what he was saying, what he expressed, as we mentioned a minute ago, is exactly the point here. Very important part of what is going on here. That Vidura has asked questions of all different sorts. Questions about Krishna consciousness. But it's not all about, this sort of aspect of Radharani's love for Krishna and Krishna's love for Radharani. It's just all different aspects of Krishna consciousness in so many ways. And Maitreya is enthusiastic, enlivened by speaking about these things from any point of view. So we should try and cultivate that perspective and type of appreciation for Prabhupada's books, for Srila Prabhupada's books. It's actually all nectar. It's really all nectar. But in order to really get the nectar from all of it, instead of just some parts of it, you have to become transcendentally attuned. Transcendentally attuned, like tuned in. Here, Prabhupada uses the term in the verse, he was infused by Vidura. Infusions, these teas, if you're into teas, different, particularly fruit infusions. They're really nice. And they infuse, they add something to your state of well-being. So they're nice. So Maitreya has been infused like that, stimulated, really stimulated with enthusiasm by all these different questions, including about things like, how does Garbhodakshay Vishnu manifest the planetary systems and the species of life and all these types of things? Yeah. One has to tune in. One has to become tuned in. And a symptom of being tuned in, very important symptom of being tuned in or becoming more tuned in at least, is that one is able to actually get the nectar from any of these transcendental subject matters and not just certain particular aspects of them or types of discussions. It's a really important point to be tuned in. I can tell you a little story about being tuned in. Some of you may have heard it because it's quite a favorite of mine. Kind of material, but still it illustrates the point of tuning in. That in the Great American Depression in the 1920s, I think late 1920s, something like that, then the whole American economy collapsed, totally collapsed, completely collapsed. All the banks went bankrupt, and it was just amazing. And it was impossible to get a job because all the employers had gone bankrupt. And if there was a job available, 500 people would be there to get the job. So the Western Union Telegram Company, they needed a Morse code transmitter. Now you probably are not so familiar with Morse code. Morse code, a little bit. Oh, you would know. The only Morse code I know, well, different letters are represented by different combinations of dots and dashes, short sounds and longer sounds. And the one I know is SOS. It's an emergency, save our souls. S is 3 short dots, and O is 3 long dots. I mean long, whatever. So SOS is you get the idea. This is Morse code. You just learned some useless information today. But you never know. It might come in handy. So anyway, they needed a Morse code operator, which obviously means someone who knows Morse code. So 500 people came. 500 people came for the job. And the vast majority, if not all, didn't know Morse code. So, but they were desperate. They were just desperate to get a job. Just like when we were building Radharanath Temple, every now and then we needed, for a day or two, just some casual labor. So the devotees would go to the labor office, whatever it is, somewhere not far away, and there'd be all these people there looking for a job. And so our devotees would get up and say, okay, anyone here know carpentry? And if there were 50 people there, 50 hands would go up. Anyone here know plumbing? 50 hands would go up. Anyone here an electrician? 50 hands would go up, because they're desperate. Then he thought, it can't be like that. So he said, anyone here know brain surgery? And 50 hands went up. I'm not kidding. So anyway, there were these 500 people there. And there was a queue going into the manager's office. He would interview them and then they'd come out. And nobody knew Morse code. And in that building, there was construction going on. And a lot of hammering. Bang, bang, bang. A lot of hammering. Suddenly, one young man from the end of the queue, he came running up, past everybody else, and ran into the manager's office just like that. And the people in the queue thought, what? How dare he do that? And then a minute or so later, the manager came out with that young man and said, all right, everybody else can go. I'm giving the job to this young man. And those people in the queue, they were really upset because he jumped the queue. And the manager said, the thing is, if you're wondering why I've given him the job and he jumped the queue, the thing is, we're looking for someone who knows Morse code, and he knows Morse code. And how do I know that? Because the people who are hammering here, they're hammering in Morse code. Yeah. And what they're saying is, if you understand this, come to the office immediately, I'll give you the job right away. In Morse code, you see. And he knows Morse code. So, yeah. So, but you got to be tuned in. If you're not tuned in, you can be in the middle of it, but you'll miss it. You'll just miss the whole thing if you're not tuned in. Yeah. So we got to tune in Krishna consciousness. Vidura is very tuned in. So he's interested in, all different aspects of Krishna consciousness. Very interested. And Maitreya is very tuned in. And he's interested and excited and inspired about all different aspects of Krishna consciousness. So whatever perspective on the subject is to be discussed, in both cases, the questioner and the answerer, they're inspired, they're excited, because it's nectar. But those who all sort of selective about things, well, it's a symptom of a kind of like, at least a lacking of deeper Krishna consciousness. I mean, possibly the presence of some material influence, but at best it's a symptom of a lacking of Krishna consciousness, because one is not able to really relish the nectar, even in some maybe very simple discussion about some not so sort of glamorous aspect of Krishna consciousness. So how to tune in? Well, of course, the basis of it is we've got to chant. We've got to chant nicely and attentively. There's a nice discussion between Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and one American scholar about the Das Avatar, the 10 kind of well-known, popularly known avatars of Vishnu. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gives a complex explanation about the Das Avatar, really complex. And then he asks the scholar, so, how do you find my explanation? And the scholar, American scholar, he was just bewildered. But he didn't want to admit that. So he said, well, I'll have to think about it. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta answered, don't think about it with your materialistic intelligence. Hear about it from devotees. Because if you hear about it from devotees, not only will you get the right information, which, your mind and just thinking about things will probably not come up with, but there's a quality to the sound vibration, a transcendental quality to the sound vibration, which gives you the capacity to understand it, without which, if you just think about it with your materialistic mind, well, you won't be tuned in. Yeah, so the foundation is to really try to chant as nicely as possible, attentively as possible. And then Krishna gives the intelligence by which things which a person might think are just not so exciting in Krishna consciousness, but I mean they're pure Krishna consciousness, but they're really wonderful, just really wonderful and stimulating. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Maharaj, some words of wisdom. Enlighten us. Save us. Vibhu Prabhu. That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's so simple. Simple for the simple, meaning not like the simpletons, like the fools, but just straightforward people. But if you're complicated, you can make it so complicated that it becomes impossible. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Oh, sorry, yes.
Question. Thank you very much for the nice class, and thank you for the association. When we listen to you and have your association, then there's some clarity that comes. and it's almost like some fog is dissipating in terms of being a little fried with material nature and understanding the importance of Krishna consciousness. Then as I leave and throughout the day, I start to lose the signal, kind of like get a bad connection.
Right.
And the fog comes back, and I can't remember my previous lives where so many lifetimes been suffering in the material world, so I just have a few years to kind of get that clarity of being fried with the material nature. So I wanted to ask, what is required to maintain that connection?
Well, yeah, you got to keep, when you're in the situation, like hearing, chanting, really, it's all very kind of a focused Krishna conscious situation. One has to really make the most of it and immerse oneself as deeply as possible. And then even if afterwards, if you got to go and just work, doing just some ordinary type of work, but it will sort of carry over to, more than when you've got the opportunity to hear and chant, if you don't really immerse yourself. But the thing is also that one has to, during the day, keep sort of replenishing, Like you eat in the morning, but you got to eat later on, otherwise you start running out of steam usually. So we got to keep hearing. And if you're working, then you should keep the headphones on, or as much as possible. Yeah, and keep yourself in a situation where you can keep getting some transcendental input as much as possible. They've just released a couple of weeks ago, less than a month, I think it's like 3 weeks or so, a recitation of the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's available. And, it's just amazing. It's so wonderful. And we should collect those things and use them regularly, and just get into the habit that, okay, when we got some spare time, okay, we switch it on. Something like that. Yes. Yeah. Well, you're talking about children and growing up, or just people?
Yeah, even first hear about Krishna killing the demons, and then, as we progress, even realize that we can't really understand the nature of the relationship between Krishna and the Devi.
Well, yeah. We should start at the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam and not jump to the 10th canto, is one way Prabhupada put it. Yeah. Start from the lotus feet. The first canto is the lotus feet of the Lord. The 10th canto is his smiling face. And the 12th canto is the crown of his head. So, yeah, we should start with Bhagavad-Gita. And even a person should start with like Science of Self-Realization, that sort of thing. Yeah. And we, as we develop our reading of Prabhupada's books, we should start from the beginning and gradually, Chaitanya Charitamrita is the postgraduate level. But still, having said that, when Srila Prabhupada was present and was producing these books one by one, he not just wanted, but he arranged that, I remember when I just joined, the 2nd canto had just come out. There was no 3rd canto printed at all. And then the 3rd canto was printed. I remember driving down to the docks in London to pick up the 1st volume of the 3rd canto, a shipment. But Prabhupada wanted us to distribute those books as they came out to the people, the ordinary people. And devotee asked Prabhupada, but if I give someone, 4th canto part 2, and they say, well, what about the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st parts? Prabhupada said, just tell them it's okay, because wherever you start, it's just nectar. So, in a sense that not exactly the 10th canto, but particularly the rasa dance, there's, you can say there's a point there to be taken. But Prabhupada had us distribute the Krishna books on the street. I was distributing the Krishna books on the street. Yeah, all over the UK. And Prabhupada specifically wanted that. So, for ourselves as students, we should study in that systematic way, but ultimately, it doesn't really make such a big difference, ultimately. Yeah. But in the sense of being a student, approaching it systematically, then we should go through like that. But otherwise, I was distributing the 6th canto on the streets of Birmingham in England, yeah. And Prabhupada was very happy about that. And distributing Chaitanya Charitamrita on the streets to the people. So, I would say that for ourselves as students, it's a good idea to go systematically through. But ultimately, it's not such a big deal. Yeah. How's that? And Prabhupada's explanations of the rasa dance are really good. Really good meaning they help an unqualified person to get a meaningful perspective on it, as opposed to sort of the classic Sahajya idea that, the boy and the girl, and it's all, going on, that sort of thing. Yeah. So Prabhupada definitely encouraged that very strongly. In fact, with the Krishna books, Prabhupada actually specifically said that he was afraid he might not live long enough that in the course of the Bhagavatam, doing the 10th canto himself, and in fact he didn't. But he wanted to give the 10th canto himself to the world, rather than just leave it to some, junior devotees later. Yeah, so he produced the Krishna books, and he had hundreds of thousands of copies printed and distributed on the streets to the Sudras and less than Sudras. And many of them became devotees. But you know what we found when we were distributing on the streets? Just like on a huge scale. We found, we would put the addresses in and invite people to write in the book, like an invitation was there. And we would focus sometimes on science of self-realization, sometimes on Bhagavad-Gita. We would only do those books for, a month or two or something. And we found we got so many more letters coming in when we were distributing science of self-realization. We'd get like 20, 30 a day coming into our office. And when we're focusing on Bhagavad-Gita, we'd get 5 or 6 or less. It's just a very interesting experience. Because it is, even though it's all transcendental and it's just all wonderful and glorious and beneficial, but it's more relatable in books like that. I frankly, even with Indian people, I never encourage them, if they've not read any of our books, I never encourage them to start with Bhagavad-Gita. I always encourage them to start with the science of self-realization. Yeah. Then they can go on to Bhagavad-Gita. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.